So spear phishing, you can imagine as a phishing, but instead you're shooting with a shotgun, targeting large sum of email addresses. You are using spear. You basically focus on one target, maybe individual, maybe a, let's say, company, and then target your messaging to that company.
You're listening to Behind Enemy Lines. In each episode, we'll explore advanced fraud fighting strategies with experts battling financial crime every day. Discover what it takes to stay one step ahead of the most sophisticated fraudsters. Ready to sharpen your defenses? Let's get started.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Behind Enemy Lines. I'm Michael LaFleur, and this episode is brought to you by ThreatMark, your ally in the war against fraud. Today, our guest is Lukáš Jakubíček, lead principal solution consultant here at ThreatMark. Hey, Lukáš, thanks for joining us. How's your day going?
Yeah, awesome. Oh, you know me. Awesome as usual. My day's
Awesome
great.
as usual. Hey, can you do me a favor? Could you introduce yourself to people who don't know anything about your background, and then we'll get into the topic about phishing?
Yeah, definitely. So hello, everyone. Lukáš Jakubíček over here. And yeah, a little bit about me. I'm in the IT world for almost 20 years. Yeah, 20 years. And from those 20 years, I spent 7 years working as a solution consultant at ThreatMark. And I have to say, I'm very happy about that because when I was very young, let's say, I wanted to be a detective, a real detective that solves crime, deals with the criminals, and solves cases. That at least that was my romantic vision of that work. And when I started high school, I've discovered this IT world, and I was hooked on the IT completely. And working for ThreatMark is like these two ideal jobs joined together. And yeah, that's why I'm super positive, and I'm considering myself very lucky to work for ThreatMark. Yeah, so that's me.
So you think that ThreatMark and what we do, helping people fight fraud, is a good combination of investigative work and IT sort of work?
100%. Yeah.
So what have you been doing lately, like in terms of, we want to talk about phishing, but that investigative sort of stuff, what have you been doing lately? And maybe even start like a little bit fundamentally about phishing, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this combination of investigative work and IT work lends itself well to, sort of your passions, right? And I know that phishing's been one of your passions lately. What can you tell me about phishing fundamentally?
So phishing, I mean, probably some definition of the phishing would be something like, well, there is some attacker trying to lure some sensitive data from victims using methods of social engineering in online world, something along these lines. But most people will understand phishing something like, yeah, I've received some email into my inbox. The email content was trying to push me to do something, like it says, well, if you don't do this, then this bad thing happened, and there is a specific time frame that you need to react. And if you click on that link, that means, you're reacting on that email. If you click on that link, you will be redirected to the phishing page. And if you put your credentials will be sent to the fraudster. And now fraudster has an access to your account, and he or she can perform fraudulent transactions there. So yeah, that's how most of the people would understand what phishing is.
Yeah, and it seems to me like with that definition that most of the time phishing is trying to get credentials, right? So, stealing the credentials so that they can do something on your behalf. I was getting ready to talk to you. I was doing a little research, and like the first earliest documented phishing campaign, well, there was one way before the internet, but it was planned. But the first one that had real victims, it seems, was back in the AOL days. So in the 1990s. So this problem's been going on for a long time, even pre-internet. And then I was thinking, that you told me to watch that TV show Ripley that's on Netflix. And, essentially that's what he was doing as part of his scam. He was stealing letters and then creating false letters to get people to do something. And he did exactly like you said, this sense of urgency that something's bad's going to happen if you don't follow the instructions that are in there. So it's an old technique, right?
Yeah, yeah, and we can find those psychological tricks in almost every phishing email that we can observe. Yeah, exactly. And then also it's good to have in mind that phishing is like the initial step to the account takeover, which is like the holy grail for fraudsters. Well, at least it was like that before, but yeah, phishing leads to account takeover.
So tell me about that. Why was account takeover the holy grail for the fraudsters, or the ultimate goal?
Yeah, because it opened the door for them to do all sorts of unauthorized transactions on the victim's account. So back then, when the world was without multi-factor authentication, the credential was the only thing that the fraudster needs to really access the account and perform illicit transactions. Yeah, and that's exactly what they wanted.
Right. Because then they could empty the account or even play the long game, just sit in there and take money out occasionally. They could just play the long game because they could pretend to be that person. Now you said something interesting just now, that was the holy grail. That implies that there's something now. What are the fraudsters? What have they moved to now?
Yeah, definitely the phishing has been dethroned by authorized push payment fraud, APP for short. Sometimes people call it scam, which is a different kind of attack vector, even though there are some similarities. Like, for instance, both of these attack vectors are aiming to the weakest link, which means person, a real human being, and they are both engage methods of social engineering. But to be more specific, when we are talking about APP fraud, the situation usually is that someone calls you, fraudster calls you from bank and tell you, hey, there are different flavors of APP fraud. And I will describe the investment scam or crypto scam, sometimes being called. So imagine that you will receive a phone call, and on the other side, there will be fraudster telling you, hey, there's a beautiful investment opportunity. If you let me in your banking account, I can set up everything for you. So you will be investing, let's say, monthly to this awesome crypto, and you can check your balance on this graphical user interface that I will make available for you. So, and then obviously the victim let this fraudster into his or her banking account. The fraudster will set up standing order, and in monthly periods, the fraud will repeat itself. And eventually, fraudster might drain the account of the victim like that.
And that again, it's a different sort of sense of urgency. In that case, it's the fear of missing out on some big investment, right? So the urgency is you got to get on board right now. And there's other attacks that they'll use, but the technique is essentially the same. But it seems to me that the problem with that is it's the actual individual who's manipulating their bank account, right? Or they're giving permission to someone while they're on the account. So that's a tricky type of fraud.
Yeah, definitely. Because back then, in cases of account takeovers, bank investigators or anti-fraud fighters, let's call them like that, they had this information on their disposal. Like they can see, there was this activity on that account, but it came from a different device, from different location, from different IP, and other, let's say, behavioral markers were completely off. But not in the case of APP fraud, where basically the victim is performing all the activities on behalf of the fraudster while being coerced over the phone or using some kind of other communication. Yeah.
So this is the new most prevalent fraud vector, APP, something that manipulates the person, but phishing hasn't gone away, has it?
Yeah, and it will never be, let's say, completely eradicated, if you ask me, because it scales better than the APP fraud. Because if you would like to start the APP fraud, you need to maintain, you need to facilitate, you need to find proper people and use them as an agent. So those people will call those victims. You need to set up offices for them. You need to set up all the infrastructure that is necessary to start with this APP scam. So you have to build this VoIP servers. I mean, everything is very, I would say, expensive. And phishing, on the other hand, you can start tomorrow. You can buy a phishing kit for around $100, or sometimes you can find phishing kits that are free. And yeah, as I was saying, you can start phish people tomorrow. And just to support my words with some statistics coming from our production environments, we have this indication that year on year we have like 60% increase in phishing detection. So, and it's been like that. Forever. All these years back, we see this trend. So phishing will stay with us. It doesn't go anywhere.
So that's an amazing statistic, right? That 60% growth year over year just in phishing attacks. But we see that fraud rates have increased exponentially as well. So just because APP fraud is increasing exponentially, there's this pull with phishing as well. So you have to pay attention to phishing. It's not just about stopping APP. Phishing is growing just as rapidly as APP fraud is. That's amazing. Now, you mentioned something about, which I find really interesting. You mentioned something about a phish kit, and I'll get to that in just a second. But the infrastructure that it takes to pull off APP fraud, right? You described a company, right? So these fraudsters are investing in companies. They're setting up buildings, they're setting up offices, they're setting up the infrastructure. So they're investing in companies. So there's a large barrier to entry. So it's usually organized crime that's doing APP fraud rings. But you mentioned this thing of a phish kit, and it sounds like a phish kit might be something, a stereotypical sort of fraudster, the guy in a basement all by himself might be able to use. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. That's like a lone wolf operation. So imagine that you can download from the internet this awesome tool, phishing kit, and it's like all in one, everything you need to initiate a phishing attack. So you can imagine that there's several, let's say, files, usually written in PHP, with some logic in it. So basically your trophies, your stolen data will be stored in some kind of a TXT file on the server. It handles all, let's say, the basic stuff that you would expect. It seems almost like a content management system. So you have your trophies there, you have the all information available about your customers. There are sometimes also simple statistics. I mean, how many times this particular URL has been used. I mean, clicked through by the victim. It's available. It's very, very handy when attackers are performing spear phishing. And also these tools are allowing you to use fishlets. So really, everything neatly packed, delivered, and you can start with your fraud tomorrow.
Wow. So there's a couple things that probably should go back and define a little bit. PHP is a web development language, right? So, you don't even really have to be a coder to implement the phish kit. It's already written. You just deploy it out there. And so it's a content management system, but it's, you pay and you can deploy it. So that's one. Now you just mentioned two things, spear phishing and fishlets. Can you explain spear phishing?
Definitely. So spear phishing, you can imagine as a phishing, but instead you're shooting with a shotgun, targeting large sum of email addresses. You are using spear. You basically focus on one target, maybe individual, maybe a, let's say, company, and then target your messaging to that company. So it can be, consequences can be very, very severe because, yeah, you've put a lot of work as a fraudster. You put a lot of work into this particular campaign, so you know who you are targeting. So that's for spear phishing. And I've mentioned fishlets. So it's a combination of two words, phishing and templates. And it is exactly how it sounds. So it's templates with the phishing pages. So you can imagine that you will go to some repository like GitHub, for instance, and there will be fishlets for LinkedIn, for Microsoft Office Suite, for Facebook, for Amazon, you name it. All those fishlets available, and if you download them, you have a, let's say, phishing site ready-made. You can use it into the phishing kit, and you're ready to go.
So, which is really should be a little bit frightening to people because, you know, the phishing that ends up in my inbox most of the time is the design does not look like the target URL that they're doing. It's really poorly done. It's got typos in it. And for me, I can look at it and it's like obviously phishing. But what you're describing is professionally designed, mimics the target URL exactly, the look, the feel, the everything, right?
Pixel perfect and update it. So there is a community of people that updates these fishlets.
So that brings up another kind of topic. So there is this. You mentioned community. So yeah, there's communities of fraudsters and hackers, and they have their forums that they chat in. They probably use Discord, and they're in constant communication with each other, and they service each other. You know, they'll take care of problems, fix bugs and stuff. But you told me one time about like phishing-as-a-service, or you know, like a web store that offers phishing tools. What can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it goes one step further, even let's say further from phishing kits. So imagine that you have a service, really online service that is available on the darknet with the marketplace, when you can buy these fishlets. I mean, within one let's say marketplace, there are no other third parties involved at all. So you will go there, you will purchase this fishlet directly. You don't need to install anything. Then you can also host this fishlet on the hosting that is provided by the service, and you can also use compromised servers to send these emails or SMS containing the phishing message with the link. So it's really all in one, and it breaks all the potential hurdles. Everyone can do that for a small fee. For a small fee.
Yeah, and with that fee, one of the things that I was struck by when you first told me that story was the fact that they actually offer customer service. You know, so like, you know, if you have a problem, you can contact them and they'll work it out for you.
Yeah, and they are even they also, you can ask them for custom development. So if you're not satisfied with specific feature, you can ask them, hey, could you please change this and that, and they will do it. I mean, if you pay them.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So they're obviously, if they're increasing all the time, if phishing attacks are increasing all the time, the tools are getting more sophisticated. I think, well, I know because we're in this business, that the techniques to catch the fraudsters who are using phishing has gotten more sophisticated as well. What do you see some of the techniques that the fraudsters are using to avoid being caught? What's some of the trends that you see out there?
Yeah, so what we saw, I mean, the traditional one is that these phishing sites, fraudsters, are trying to avoid, they don't want to have unnecessary attention from the companies like ours, for instance. So, you know, companies like ours, they snoop the internet and they seek page after page, and they will seek for signs of a phishing. And if they find signs of a phishing, they will try to mitigate the site, right? And that's what fraudster, that's what they don't want. So they can instruct these phishing pages to react on that situation if the specific traffic is, let's say, if there is a specific traffic from specific IP that they know is associated with the company A and company B, company C that deals with the phishing. So they can say, well, if you are accessing from that IP, there is nothing for you. There is like 404, no phishing site for you. So that's one thing, how they do it. And sometimes we've also stumbled upon this technique that they are trying to find out if the visitor is a real person or if it's bot. Because, I mean, this is typical for those crawlers. They're bot, obviously. They're not human beings who are crawling on those sites. So If they find out that there is a bot, they will serve them different content. And sometimes, and that was, let's say, funny investigation that we had recently, for bots, the phishing site was not there. Instead of phishing site with all those login and password input fields, there was like a taxi service, like company web for small taxi service in New York, somewhere like that. So yeah, that was really funny.
At least they have a sense of humor, right? But one thing I should point out, you said we a couple times, and then you mentioned an investigation that we carried out. For those who don't know, ThreatMark has a group or a division called the Cyber Fraud Fusion Center, which is a group of fraud fighters and security analysts who constantly scan the internet looking for these sorts of threats. And so when Lukáš mentions we or investigation, he's talking about what the Cyber Fraud Fusion Center has uncovered. So this taxi referral is something that the Cyber Fraud Fusion Center had run into, which is pretty funny. So one of the things that I think banks or financial institutions or even e-commerce, you know, one of the things that they've done to try to mitigate the impact of phishing is they've implemented MFA, as if multi-factor authentication, as if multi-factor authentication is going to stop the problem of account takeover, right? Because again, the ultimate goal of phishing is to get those credentials so the fraudster can log in to the application, and MFA is supposed to help keep the fraudsters out. What are some problems with just implementing MFA?
Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful idea to have some additional authentication challenge while you're logging to the service, but fraudsters found a way how to circumvent it. And I'm sure that you know all these things, but I will mention a couple of them. Evil proxy, Modliška, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, and recently Evil Jinx in its second version. So those are using reverse proxy, and they are able to work as a man in the middle. So you can imagine that you have a phishing site, you as a victim, you will place the credentials into that phishing site, and then using this middleman, this information got propagated to the actual login page where the authentication happens. And then the victim thinks that, yeah, okay, so I'm in this service, I've authenticated successfully, now I can do whatever they want, and they do. But the communication has been intercepted by this middleman. So not only credentials and the content of the authentication challenge has been intercepted, but most importantly, the authentication token now in possession of the fraudster. So fraudster can take this authentication token, place it into his browser as a cookie, and from that moment he's got like free pass to this service, like without any restrictions, without any limitations, and I mean no need for authentication at all. So that's like a silver bullet for fraudsters. There are some ways how to prevent this, but most of the authentication components are vulnerable against this kind of a tool.
Yeah. I think that the really interesting thing is like the fraudsters are smart, right? And they're incentivized, right? If they can break into the account, or if they can start to take the money out of the accounts, or you know, if they can exploit the credentials that they have, they stand to make a lot of money. This is how they make their living. And if it's organized crime, this is how the organized crime institution keeps growing and keeps beating itself. But so they're incentivized to try to break the protections that institutions put up there, right? And so this is a great example that you have this, you know, you have this technique, multi-factor authentication, that worked for a while to keep bad guys out of the accounts, but then they figure out a way to break that. And so then it just sort of keeps cascading, you know, like, you know, ThreatMark has a way, and we'll have other podcasts that talk about this more specifically, but ThreatMark has a way to look at behavioral intelligence of a user so that you'd always be confident that the user who's interacting with the system is who they say they are, right? So we'll talk about that more later, but that's one of the techniques. So you're looking at the individual. But my real point is that the fraudsters keep iterating their techniques over time. And now they have even more powerful tools. And I think we'll save this for another podcast, but I just want to introduce one or have you talk briefly about, okay, so we had this brute force sort of thing, harvesting credentials, getting into accounts. Then we introduced MFA, which helped, but now they have this way of intercepting the tokens. What's next? What are fraudsters doing now? What tools do they have out there that help them continue their phishing? And I think like of ChatGPT or AI.
Yeah, definitely with the advent of ChatGPT introduced, I mean, that's a different area that they can explore still. And what came to my mind is that recently, I mean, you have different techniques how to smuggle the phishing page through the points to solutions that deals with the security. I mean, you have some product, and that product analyzes network traffic. And if they see that there is something that resembles some phishing page, they will raise a flag and they will say, no, you shall not pass. However, there are techniques which allows the fraudster to smuggle this content to the browser. It's called, I'm not sure about the actual name right now, but I will remember later. But you can use specific way how to render the phishing site in the browser. So along the way, it's not recognizable as a phishing page, meaning that using ChatGPT, for instance, since we are talking about ChatGPT, you can upload login page to the ChatGPT and give it instructions. Hey, please use Canvas, and part of the HTML markup, use Canvas and make me exact replica of that login page, for instance, but using Canvas, which means that it will draw those elements in the browser, but it will be not understandable if you would read the code. So if you are security product, you're reading the code, you will see just the scrambled data, and you will see, okay, so that's something, but probably nothing suspicious. But the victim will see exact replica of the login page. So yeah, the fraudsters smuggled their way into your browser.
Yeah. So just to be clear, what's going on, one of the techniques to stop phishing is to look at the source code of the page in real time. And there's lots of signs that it's a phishing page. So you would either have a bot or a human looking at the source code. And in this case, most likely would be a bot, because now you've got ChatGPT essentially drawing the page as an image, and the code representing that drawing, the bot can't read it because it looks like a picture. It's not showing any of those signs. So that's one of the sophisticated techniques that they're doing. And so they're leveraging AI to overcome one of the techniques.
Yeah.
So
I remember the last mile reassembly. That's the of the area of expertise, and there are different techniques like use base 64 coding for the exact thing that you just described. Right. You just smuggle the code, which is lying low under the radar of those security products, but in the browser they are rendered just perfectly.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I do want to talk to you more about AI and its use in fraud techniques, and because it goes beyond phishing too. So I think we could devote another half hour, 45 minutes just talking about AI and fraud as well. So as we're winding down, knowing that they're sophisticated, knowing that it evolves, knowing that it changes, knowing that they're well funded, what's some advice that you might give someone who's trying to stop phishing attacks from impacting their organization?
So I would say that fraudster, and we've mentioned that here already, so fraudster will always be one step ahead. So it will be always cat and mouse game. But companies can focus what happened also next after the login. Because, I mean, various measures can fail for multiple reasons. But when you have someone in your system, there is one logical thing that you can do, and it's a good thing to do, at least that's what we think at ThreatMark, is to analyze continuously throughout the whole session the behavior biometrics of those users interacting with the application. So the way how you type on your keyboard, the way how you swipe on your mobile phone, the way how you navigate with your mouse, everything is, let's say, evaluated. And then at the end of the session, or any time between, in fact, you can ask, hey, what do you think about this user? Have we seen this user before? And if yes, okay, so it's legitimate user. If no, well, probably fraudster is trying to do something on your behalf. So that's, I would say, a very clever thing to do. And then behavior biometrics will be more and more important if you ask me. I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I have an analogy of that I like to always use is, back in the day before digital banking, you had to do your banking at the branch, right? If you had money you needed to deposit, you'd have to go into the branch. Well, over time, the people who work at the bank become really familiar with you and your behaviors. So you walk into the branch, they recognize, hey, it's Lukáš, he's bringing in his check from his job at the pizza restaurant, and he's going to deposit it at the teller, right? So they know you, they know how you behave, they know all of this. And so, what you just described is that equivalent of knowing the customer so well that you can tell, yes, it's the customer, but they're kind of acting different than they usually act. And maybe we need to protect them from themselves because, like you said earlier, they're the weakest link right now. The customer's the weakest link in that scams and social engineering chain, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely true. And as a fraudster, you cannot replicate or mimic someone's behavior, and that will stay.
Right. Well, I think we're about out of time. It's always great to talk to you. I really enjoy it. The stuff you share is always interesting, and I think your passion that started when you were really young and carried over into what you're doing now shows. And I really want to thank you for being the first guest on Behind Enemy Lines. So have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Behind Enemy Lines. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts so you never miss a conversation on fighting fraud. We'll see you on the next one.